All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is the meeting of the Education, Election, and Housing Committee of the Montgomery County Delegation. I'm Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield, and I'm the chair, and we are going to go ahead and get started with our meeting today. The first item on our agenda is MC 8-24, Montgomery County Restriction on Use of Real Property. And we have Delegate Moon, who is the sponsor, available to talk to us a little bit about this, as well as to present an amendment to the bill. Go ahead, Delegate Moon.
Uh, Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, MC 824 is a bill to essentially protect the concept of local zoning in Montgomery County. Um, I will just note that the bill as introduced was quite broad, and so we have taken some time to talk to stakeholders in the planning department, in the Attorney General's office, and the like, to narrow the bill quite significantly. Hopefully you have the amended bill text. If not, I will ask Chris in my office to forward it to you. Um, but the essence of the bill is this. We have homeowners associations and other private land agreements dating back many, many decades before the advent of modern zoning in Montgomery County. And folks got together and essentially attempted to lock their land from certain types of uses, binding future owners in perpetuity to these decisions that were made many decades ago. And oftentimes, with very questionable intent. This issue actually came onto my radar because our good friends in adjacent Washington, D.C., are actually looking at a bill at this very moment on this topic, and it did inspire this effort. And what was going on was decades ago, you may have had some racist landowners who attempted to, again, before the advent of modern zoning, stop various groups from moving in, and they inserted language saying things like no blacks, no Jews, no Asians, also nothing but single family detached zoning on this same parcel. And so the Montgomery County Planning Department started mapping um, where these racial covenants and these restrictions on use
That's
started
okay.
to get put into law in Montgomery County. And so I see the chat is disabled, so I'll have to send this all along after the meeting. But if for those who want to follow along, just Google Montgomery County planning mapping segregation, and you will hit a report about the history of zoning and segregation in Montgomery County, along with a link to a working draft interactive map. Again, if you really want to dive into the weeds of this, where you can see the very particular parcels, the year, the particular groups that were excluded from living there, and the restriction on housing type that was placed on that same parcel of land. So that's the context. Again, our friends in Washington, D.C. are also undertaking an effort to both unlock the housing potential of the land, especially that land that where that restriction was put into place with a racist intent in mind. So I will also send along the testimony packet for the DC version of this legislation, so you could see some of the discussion going on in our neighbors next door. But it has very broad support again from the city attorney general and the like. So what is the amended version of how we attack this? So again, the problem is these restrictions on the use of land were often placed on deeds and in HOA covenants and bylaws. Um, and so how this plays out today is, just to give you an example, Montgomery County now has accessory apartments by right, and a whole process and requirements that one needs to meet in order to do that. But if you have a 1930 restriction on your land that says no Black, no Asian, no Jewish, also nothing but single family detached housing here, that might appear to create a conflict. The county has already said that they don't respect those covenant restrictions when issuing these licenses, but it muddies the water and it creates opportunities for folks to try and bring a legal challenge and otherwise impede what the decision that was already made in the county. So the bill as amended would call these restrictions on housing types that are otherwise allowed by law as invalid against public policy. So that is the crux of the bill with the amendment. Now, here's the key part where the narrowing comes into play. I took a close look at what DC did, and they were actually a bit more surgical in how they looked at this, but they created a date cutoff for when they killed these covenants. And here, what is proposed in the amended language is that we make the cutoff 1958 when Montgomery County moved towards comprehensive zoning, and there was no need for this sort of patchwork housing policy created de facto racist and segregationist neighborhood by neighborhood. So again, the bill would have two applications. It would invalidate these HOA covenants from pre-1958, pre-modern Montgomery County zoning, and prospectively going forward. In other words, we're not going to replicate this problem in the future. We now have a modern county with modern zoning and planning, and we don't need neighborhoods trying to opt out of or circumvent the zoning process. But everything from 1958 through the present day, we would not mess with. So that's the bill in a nutshell, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Delegate Moon.
Um,
Are there any questions from the committee? to
Yes,
Delegate
Madam
Moon?
Chair.
All right, go ahead, Delegate Kaufman.
Well, it's just a brief comment, and I know you prefer questions, but this is important to me. I want to thank you I'm trying to turn on my camera. I want to thank you very much, Delegate Moon, for pursuing this bill, because my grandparents were some of the first few Jewish people to move into Chevy Chase Village. And there was such violence about Jews moving into Chevy Chase Village that for their first few weeks in Chevy Chase Village, they had to have undercover cops on their lawn. So I've seen the ugly side, or heard about the ugly side of these covenants. And I thank you for putting it forward, because we need to, even if it's only symbolic now, we need to get rid of these Scrooges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate Kaufman. Any other questions regarding the amendment or the bill itself?
Hey,
Hey, how are you?
good. How are you?
Okay. Are there any
So-
folks on here from the Federation, Montgomery County Civic Federation, or any of the other HOAs? Okay, because we did hear from them as well. All right. All right, Delegate Moon, thank you so very much. No, I don't see any other questions. So I will move on. Thanks again, Delegate Moon. All right, we're going to go ahead to MC 2224, which is the Montgomery County Public Schools, School Personnel Training, Religious Discrimination Prevention. And I do understand there are a couple of people from MCPS here that can talk to us a little bit about the bill itself, in that I think, let's see, is Delegate Corman's Chief of Staff here? And that is Joseph. Okay, Joseph.
Delegate.
How are you
yeah.
doing?
I'm doing
Joseph,
good.
would you first of all kind of just go back and summarize the bill for us? And then we'll take it from there.
Yes, of
Okay?
course. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As a reminder, this bill is would mandate that MCPS require training for school personnel on the prevention of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other forms of discrimination. We've all obviously seen some of the increases in hateful activity in the last few months, but it's not just a recent problem. It's been happening for several years now. And so the bill is really an attempt to address and make sure that our school personnel have the proper training to be able to identify forms of religious discrimination and make sure that they're not inadvertently or purposely spreading that themselves. So that's the overall purpose of the bill, and we're happy that MCPS is here to share more about what their current teachings are, and we appreciate the committee's consideration for this legislation.
Great, thank you so much. And we will hear from MCPS to find out what currently is in place regarding training of teachers and staff. So I see Mr. Edmondson. Would you like to go ahead and proceed and inform us of what MCPS is currently doing? Okay, looks like you're on mute. Or we're not hearing you. Okay, looks like it's off. So go ahead, let's see. Nope. We cannot hear you. Okay, you want to do it one more time?
Hey, Greg, it's Margie here. Hi there. Good afternoon. My name's Margie Lopmatsatos, and I too am in Montgomery County Public Schools. Sometimes,
Yes.
Greg, when it happens for me, if you just log out and log back in, it might work. And in the meantime, I can start to talk while he
That'll
does
be
that
fine. Thank you very much.
to get us started. He's going to
Perfect.
talk about the mandatory compliance training on religious diversity that is for all personnel. And I want to highlight some of the additional work we're doing on professional learning. We are developing right now, we'll be running it all summer long for mandatory professional learning for all school leaders, specifically on hate bias. So that's a new development that we're working on that will include religious discrimination in that professional learning. So that's happening. And year long, we've been working on anti-racist and culturally responsive learning, professional learning mandatory required for all central service leaders, for all school leaders. And then we have 2 days set aside this year and 2 days set aside next year for all 10-month employees, which is mostly teachers and then counselors, that type of support personnel for students, in which they're called district-wide professional learning days. And that work has been focused on and will continue to focus on anti-racist and culturally responsive practices, mainly focusing on instruction and instructional strategies that those particular roles can use when working with students. So in addition, now I see Greg has come back on. He can talk more specifically about the compliance training that we have that focuses on religious diversity. And that is for all school personnel, which includes bus drivers, food service workers, building service workers, teachers, administrators. So Greg, any luck?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, Greg, we can hear you now.
Okay, so unfortunately, now my video is not working. I have no idea what's going on.
Well, that's fine. As long as we can hear you, I think we're okay.
I am very
So if you will comment on what training is currently available, who it is geared towards, how the training is actually conducted. If you'll give us some details, I think that will be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I apologize for this. It's what a mess. So and I've been having problems for several days with this. I'm trying to get tech out here. But anyway, so we have including substitute teachers, we have about 32,000 employees. who are working in Montgomery County Public Schools. And we have a policy. The policy is ACA, which is our board policy on non-discrimination, equity, and cultural proficiency. So in order to ensure that all of our employees have an understanding of what that policy means and the expectation that no student, no employee, no one general within our school system and our school district experiences discrimination of any form. And that could include religion, that could include race, that could include gender identity, sexual orientation, any type of discriminatory act. Our board and our school district is committed to ensuring that does not occur. And if it does, because as you've mentioned earlier, and we are all well aware, it has happened. How do we make sure that we not only report it and handle it per these policies and per district regulations, but also how do we restore and help our victim and or victim group to get back to good, so to speak. But our policy is non-discrimination, equity, cultural proficiency, and we train all of our employees through our compliance modules. Our compliance modules include several different content areas, from child abuse and neglect to signs of suicide to gang and gang-like behavior, student harassment, bullying, hate bias incidents. And another piece of that content is our religious diversity. So we have an equity initiatives unit led by Dr. Alston, who provides the content, and then my team makes sure that all of these different pieces and all of these different content areas get into a computer module. It's about a 2.5-hour module. If you take it from start to finish, there's 3 modules actually in total. The module that has religious diversity is our student safety module to ensure our students are safe at all times. And what that module really has with regards to religious diversity is ensuring that our employees and anybody who works with our students understands what the religious guidelines are all about. We have a multi-page document within the Board of Education on guidelines for religious diversity. And that training makes sure that all of our employees understand what this looks like within our classrooms, what this looks like on our campuses and in our offices. So student absences for religious observations, that's a piece, for example, of content where our students should be able to observe their religion and not be penalized within the classroom or within the school access or the school activities that are planned that they may be involved in. And there's several different examples along that lines, but allowing students the opportunity to pray before meals, so to speak, or provide them with a safe space if they want to congregate or come together independently for prayer or for even just group settings within their religion, and making sure everybody's on board with exactly what we expect and how we can keep them safe during these situations. The module itself mentions anti-Semitism, but it does not get into anti-Semitism in isolation. It talks about all religious diversity, and it talks about being open and understanding and welcoming and inclusive of all religions. We do have a hate bias district-wide plan that we are implementing pervasively throughout Montgomery County this year. We're looking at different pillars of education within our classrooms. We're looking at pillars of community support. How do we communicate clearly within our community and with our parent community, but also our school community. And we're also looking at how we ensure that there's training involved for our employees. One of the courses that we are implementing this summer is on hate bias and on implementing this district-wide plan. And specifically within that course, we will provide much more detailed training on anti-Semitism, what that looks like, how do you recognize and how to report that within our schools, and also how to support. We're a restorative justice school district within Maryland, of course. How do we support our students within that context if they are unfortunately victimized? So those are some of the options and some of the training plans that we do have in place on a within our compliance on a regular basis, but also moving forward with our plans for this summer.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions by the committee members? Okay, let me just make sure I'm,
Looks like a couple hands are up.
yes, I do see, okay. All right, so we will go ahead and start with Delegate Cullison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For some
Mhm.
reason, it popped back onto mute.
Okay.
So I wanted to say something first and then ask a question. I heard Mr. Edmondson a couple of times. You're talking about the students feeling safe, which is absolutely my goal, is that students will always feel safe in our schools, and all students will feel safe in our schools. And that gets me. But I guess I also want to get to a level of inclusivity. And I mean, you spoke about it a little bit with respect to respecting all religions and being inclusive and welcoming, but I wasn't feeling like that was, like a really intentional kind of focus, and rather that the safety issue was the bigger focus. So I actually have two questions. Is there anything in this bill, the proposed bill, that you feel you are doing, and you can relate specifically to the portion of the bill? You just ran through some of it, but is there anything in the bill that I guess the better question, that you feel you are not doing? And the second piece is, this bill is focused on staff, but one of the roles staff has is to deal with bullying. And, there's a lot of bullying around religion, sexual orientation, race still in our schools, and then we are seeing more and more of this. So is part of that training how all staff in a school, can prevent and de-escalate those situations? So, Madam Chair, that's all my questions.
First of all, Delegate Cullison, it's very nice to see you, and thank you for all your work and support with MCPS over the years. I mean, you've been a key player in our development, so thank you. Secondly, and I'm not going to speak directly to the bill because just truth in lending, I don't know the nuts and bolts of the bill deeply. I was asked to speak on what we are currently doing. I will say that, of course, we are focused on student safety, as I mentioned. We are equally focused on inclusivity and making sure that all feel welcome within our school. And I think that has come through not only in the compliance training, because I mentioned that the content of the compliance training deals with religious diversity and, of course, student safety, but other aspects of that training are embedded deeply within the compliance with regards to student bullying, harassment, and our Title IX expectations on sexual harassment and how to recognize and report that as well. So we provide quarterly training. We had one in August and one in November, and we have one coming up on bullying and harassment specifically. How that ties in, I mean, we kind of look at it in totality. We have hate bias incidents that happen. Those hate bias incidents can be like a Venn diagram circle where everything's caught in the middle, where this one act of hate included discrimination of a religious matter. It included bullying. It included hazing at times. And so we're making sure, to the best of our ability, to make sure that we are empowering our staff to understand exactly what all this is and what it looks like, and then reaching out to the resources like Dr. Lope's office within professional development, or my office within student compliance and student welfare and compliance, as well as our school and student well-being office, to make sure that we're handling it correctly. We're involving our police partners when appropriate, but also making sure that our students are provided that restorative piece to be able to, again, I kind of call it get back to good, but to heal and to be able to move forward in a productive manner as efficiently as possible. So I don't know if that grabbed all of it for you, but we do look at it in the totality, and we look at the inclusivity of this and how important it is.
I appreciate that. And Madam Chair, I am sorry, but I have a meeting with the Speaker's office.
No
So,
problem. Thank you very
have
much for
to
being
jump
here, Delegate Collison.
Thank
Delegate-
you.
Delegate Vogel, it looks like you have a question as well.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I'm running between two different meetings right now, so I'm on my phone. But Gregory, just to clarify, I heard Mr. Edmondson, sorry, I heard about the different trainings, but my understanding and what has been shared with me from my constituents, which has me concerned, is that in terms of mandatory trainings, and my staff reviewed the one anti-bias mandatory training earlier a few months ago. In that training, if I understand correctly, this is the mandatory training. There is no mention of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, religiously motivated bias. Is that correct? That there's no mandatory training in those areas?
So if the one you're referring to that happened in November, I'm not sure exactly which one, and we provide training ongoing. That did not specifically address Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. It addressed hate bias, and so we were looking at all forms of hate and what that looked like and how to recognize and report it. The compliance training that I spoke of, which has a specific module on religious diversity, that is what I was speaking of earlier within our compliance training. That is mandatory. Our employees are not allowed to work in their positions until our office has cleared them of completion. And as well, this upcoming training that I spoke of for the summer, which will include hate bias, it will be targeted, it will be focused on hate bias with this more specific, isolated anti-Semitism, Islamophobia content. That will be mandatory for all of our school administration and all of our school leaders. And that will be this summer, and that will be mandatory, yes. So hopefully that helps.
And just from my understanding, those trainings include specific examples of how anti-Semitism manifests itself in a school community?
So the compliance training does not. It refers to it, but it does not provide what anti-Semitism, for example, looks like. It does not provide specifics on hate against Black and brown. It does not provide specific. It references them, and it references like our student gender identity guidelines and the discrimination against our LGBTQ plus community, but it does not get into that specifics. This summer's training will. But as a public school, within our compliance and knowing the objectivity of our work in serving all stakeholders, it is intentional that we are not highlighting and isolating those specific types of religions and those specific types of hate, but making sure, as Dr. Collison mentioned earlier, being inclusive of all of this understanding.
And I understand that. This is the last point that I'll make here. I think my concern when it comes to some of these forms of hate, it's not so clear. When you see a swastika, I don't think that in the eyes of universally that you associate that with the Holocaust or anti-Semitism. We should, right? But I don't think that's the case right now. So having mandatory trainings that help illustrate what some of those how these forms of hate manifest in our school communities, I think is incredibly important. So for that reason, I'm a co-sponsor of this bill and I'm supportive of this bill, but I appreciate your time, Mr. Edmondson.
No, and I appreciate your questions because yes, we have to do more with that specifically. And that's what this summer's training will have. It will have examples and scenarios around what you even mentioned about the example of the swastika. And we do have currently, we do have within our professional development opportunities elective courses specifically on anti-Semitism, specifically on Islamophobia, several different courses where thousands of our employees have been taking them throughout the last several years. But making some of those examples more mandatory is what we're looking at this summer. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any, but I have a few questions for you, Mr. Edmondson.
Sure.
Usually when there's training, there's policy around training so that you meet whatever the goal is of the training. Is there a specific policy that deals with just not over, just not dealing with anti-hate, but is there a policy that includes all of the religious hate and all the other, forms of discrimination as well?
So we have our district, which is Religious Diversity Guidelines. We can certainly send you that document that we send out and we ensure all of our employees have access to. Those guidelines within MCPS are based on the policy mentioned earlier. It's called it's board policy ACA, and it's called non-discrimination, equity, and cultural proficiency. And all of those works, like our religious diversity guidelines, our guidelines for student gender identity, our gangs and gang-like behavior responsiveness, all of our behavioral threat assessments. We have guidelines within the district, and they are all based on that, what I call this umbrella policy on discrimination, equity, and cultural proficiency.
And with those guidelines, does each employee receive a copy of that, and are they asked to sign it to show that they've received it and possibly understand it? And is there somebody that really explains it to them?
So each of these guidelines are part of that compliance training. They have to digitally sign off. We actually have the electronic module is where they have to read it and go through it and click through the booklets before they can proceed on to the next part of the compliance training. And then our office goes through and makes sure that they did their expected work of reading through and understanding. And we do have within our module, we have what we call checks for understanding to make sure that they're able to demonstrate that they have an understanding of key concepts and key vocabulary within the modules, the compliance modules.
Okay, and you mentioned those modules are mandatory, correct?
They are mandatory with all.
Okay, and you said they were 2.5 hours, and they involve both hate bias, religious diversity, and safety?
Correct. And
Okay.
there's several different categories that they cover. These compliance trainings started about 10 years ago with the expanded laws around recognizing and reporting child abuse and neglect. And then we, new laws and expectations from COMAR, came out around recognizing signs of suicide. And we started to build and develop over the past 10, 12 years on these compliance trainings. And now they include like our employee code of conduct information and what employees are expected along the lines of their expected professionalism and behavior. They cover workplace bullying and what is expected and how to report any types of adult to adult or staff to staff discrimination or hate or bullying. And so, yeah, all of these different areas you mentioned are within this comprehensive compliance training.
Okay, and does the compliance training, and I would assume the guidelines, because you mentioned that is something that they have to sign off on, does it include any kind of enforcement or consequences to not following those guidelines?
Absolutely. So, like I said, my office monitors the completion. Employees are not allowed to work with students until they are completed. If they're hired mid-year, they're given 5 days. They're given 12 hours to complete the child abuse and neglect. That is the what we deem in Montgomery County is the absolute, where they cannot be working with students before they complete the child abuse and neglect. And that comes from some of the more stringent laws and regulations, federally, not only state and through our board policy. And then we give them 5 days to complete the rest of the modules. If they're not completed, they're pulled out of classroom by their school administration to complete. And we have a progressive discipline. So there's about 4 or 5 different levels of progressive discipline. The first one obviously is removal of working with our students. That's front and foremost the expectation. But if they're given a directive in writing after they failed to complete it, after verbal reminders, they'll be given the expectation in writing, and then it becomes a directive where they're failing to comply with expectations of a supervisor, and then could ultimately lead to dismissal from Montgomery County Public Schools. And we've had several examples over the past years, but we make sure that to a person that this is completed.
Okay, and if I heard you correctly, there are no specific examples that are a part of the training that you guys provide. Is that correct?
Give specific examples of the training or specific examples of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia?
Correct. I apologize. That is correct. Specific examples of whichever module you're using. There's no specific examples of, for example, hate bias or religious diversity, so that people understand clearly what that really means.
There are specific examples of hate bias and religious diversity within the compliance training modules. There are not specifics to one isolated or one specific religion. For example, like anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. They're referenced as forms and examples of hate bias, but not examples of what like anti-Semitism would look like, or Islamophobia, or again, an LGBTQ example